Okay. So we don't know, do you know, Bill, how many folks approximately signed in or registered? Oh, you're on mute.
Twice, sorry.
I'm told FPN has 6 registered.
Okay, okay.
So we'll give it maybe 1 more minute because we like to keep these right at the 2 to 2:30 mark.
Yep. Yep. And Daisy, can you see the screen?
Yes, everything you wanted to know about financial aid.
See, I can move that over there.
Oh, I like that $1 bill. I just saw which president's on there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it ought to be the 100 though, since the 100's the one that doesn't have a president on it.
Just wait. Let's just say that as the slide goes on, the denomination does get higher. Just put that out.
Okay.
There's
ruined
a
it for everyone else then.
There's a method to my madness, or at least there's a madness to my method. I'm not sure which is the right answer, but there we go.
The suspense is killing me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, good.
Actually, the screen that we see, Daniel, is the one that includes the preview of the next slide.
Oh, so I'm going to change that. Thank you. Let's switch the share. Let's change it.
So we will get a preview, actually.
There we go. How's that?
There you go. All right, that's the full PowerPoint.
There you go.
Why don't we go ahead and start? And I just asked someone, Bob, or I see FPN itself, the entity is also signed on. If someone could start the recording so we get it recorded. It is recording. Daniel, please take us away with everything you wanted to know about financial aid, but we're afraid to ask.
Great. So thank you for joining us. This is designed to be an interactive session. So I'm going to do a couple of slides just to sort of go through quickly, but then I wanted to have time for people to ask questions. But I thought we'd start with some basic content. This really is designed to be a learning opportunity for you. So if there's a burning question about financial aid you've always wanted to know, now is your opportunity to ask it. So let's dive in. We're going to cram about 4 semesters of education into 15 minutes. So we're going to start with the 101 class. So if you remember from your sort of basic first year student class, you start with 101 and you build from there. So just a reminder, for most students, there are 4 ways to apply for financial aid. You have to do all 4. The FAFSA is for every student, every school. You do it once a year. The CSS profile is for schools that are mainly higher cost private schools. They require that form as well. For Florida students, there is a Florida financial aid application they submit during their senior year in high school. And finally, most schools, or many schools, have their own scholarship application or financial aid application that students are suggested to file. So for a student who's filling out an application, many of them begin and end with the FAFSA. And as a reminder, there's more than the FAFSA they have to do. Time frames are that the application opens October 1 of the prior year. So October 1, 2019 will be the launch of the 2021 academic year. And I put a note here about this thing called verification, which is a hot button issue right now, but it's in a sense a proof of the information you've put on the FAFSA. And approximately 40 to 50% of applicants are being selected for verification. It's higher for Pell and low-income students. And if you are selected, you have to provide a copy of your tax information, either by actually providing it or by linking your FAFSA to the IRS data. And there often is what's called a verification form that students are required to complete as well. So what I did is this graphic actually, I really like this graphic. This graphic comes from NCAN, the National College Access Network, and it shows you that of the 1.8 million low-income high school seniors that are in our country, only about 31% of them will get a Pell Grant because of this, what they call the leaky FAFSA pipeline. How many students actually start by submitting a FAFSA? How many then complete their FAFSA? How many are selected for verification? And how many just don't come through and complete the documents that they're required to? So you'll see, here is the sort of, very good representation of a real problem in terms of getting people to go through the financial aid process. So that's a quick 101. Questions before we jump into 201? Okay, so here's 201. So what's the basic math, right? The basic math of financial aid is this cost. We've talked about this in other things we've done with FPM, but cost of attendance minus EFC equals need. And reminder, cost of attendance is total cost, total budget. It's calculated, we did a whole session on this, which you can link back up to, but it's calculated by type of student, and it's individualized for that student. Minus what they're expected to contribute from the FAFSA yields their need, and that's their maximum eligibility for need-based financial aid. What makes up that family contribution is a combination of four things: parent contribution from income, from assets, student contribution from income, and from assets. And over here, I've talked about what are the things that make someone dependent versus independent. And again, we don't need to go through all of this, but we can get you a copy of the PowerPoint. You can look at it yourself, or this graphic actually comes right from studentaid.gov, so you can see it there as well. And that's important to understand whether parent information is required or not required. So by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but now we have moved to the $1,000 bill for 301. I skipped right over the $100 bill. We went to the $1,000 bill. So as we get into the third semester, just a couple of things to keep in mind. Financially, it does require that a student continue to show what's called satisfactory academic progress. There are three components of that: a GPA component, a completion percentage, you have to complete a certain percent of your classes, and a maximum time frame. And the reason I put these here, we're not going to, unless you want to, but we're not going to talk a lot about this, but just to be clear that a student can't fail every class and expect to continue to get financial aid. There's a point in time at which the student will no longer receive financial aid unless they have extenuating circumstances they can show.
So, Daniel, can I ask you a question at this point?
Please, help yourself.
These, like the 2.0 cumulative GPA, the bullets you have here for elements of satisfactory academic progress, are those Valencia colleges? Are those, who sets those?
Good question. Those are minimum federal standards. So colleges can, you see the message that says some lower interim. Colleges can have, by the time the student finishes their sophomore year, they have to be at a 2.0. But a college can set a lower freshman year GPA. So they can have a 1.75, for example, as a freshman year GPA, and have a 2.0 by sophomore year. But the 2.0 by sophomore year, 66.7% completion ratio, and maximum time frame are basic federal definitions. Colleges can also always ask for better than that, but that's the basic federal requirements. Good question. And then on the bottom of the page, what you see is the ways in which we as financial aid administrators can show our professional judgment, things we can do to make differences based on extenuating circumstances. And we're going to talk in one of our future Ask an Expert sessions about this concept called dependency overrides, and why might you make someone who's ordinarily dependent independent. We'll talk about that. But these are the ways in which my colleagues in their professional area can extend for people who have these extenuating circumstances. So cost of attendance, satisfactory progress, other pieces there as well. The last piece is, where do you go if you want more information? And this is the $1 million question.
Wow.
Yeah, well, you know, we jumped quickly from 1,000 to 1 million. The power of square roots, I guess, or squares rather. So the first one is, I wanted to highlight, I have actually begun to keep a blog. So I realized that our students and our families need a lot of information, and I wanted a way that was friendly and easy for them to understand. So I've begun to keep a blog, which you are free to share with your students, with your colleagues. The web address is moneyman.home.blog. Pretty easy. I'm the Moneyman. So moneyman.home.blog. And you'll see, you know, it's got lots of information about free money, about how to apply for scholarships, what are the different kinds of applications you need to do, and it is chat enabled. So as students or you have questions, for example, here's a question that came up about the Florida financial aid application. You can see here's a question and here's my response to the question. So it's meant to be interactive. So you're welcome to share this link with your folks as well. FinAid.org, I've referenced this site before. They're a phenomenal resource for people who are looking for information about financial aid. It's basically, I would say, a doctoral thesis on how financial aid works. So you can choose any of these sections, how the paperwork works, what are some questions, how do I get a calculator, lots of great information there. And of course, my email. You're always welcome to email me if you have questions about anything after we're done with this workshop today. So I used about half the time, but I wanted to give you the, as I say, the quick overview of a couple of semesters worth of material. But I'm really interested to hear if you have questions that I can answer about how the process works. What are the sort of questions that you wanted to know about financial aid but were afraid to ask in the past?
Daniel, this is around financial aid. One of the, Helios did research, one of the largest impediment to students applying for college is fear of student debt, which is ironic. That includes Florida students, which is ironic since generally our higher ed is pretty affordable in Florida. Do you have an idea of how much average debt a student graduating from Valencia College may accumulate? And I realize their students are all across the board.
So right, so it's a great question, Bill. I do have the information on Valencia's, and I will pull it up for you. I'll also say that what we've seen, so there are a couple of answers to that question. What we've seen in general is that folks are actually borrowing less over time at Valencia than more. So I know that sort of runs in the face of what you hear in the marketplace, and we're not alone. So in Florida, what we've seen, and I'll give you some information here about this. So here's our 17-18 numbers, and let me zoom in so you can see a little better what I mean. So you'll see here at Valencia, and let me zoom out because that's a little bit too big. Sorry, give me 1 second. Well, you'll see at Valencia is that we've actually cut our borrowing rates essentially in half over the last 8 years or so. So if I go back to our borrowing rates over the last several years, you can see that in 12-13, students, about 13,000 of our students borrowed about $73 million. But as of 2017-18, it's only about 8,000 students borrowing about 41 million. So we've literally cut our borrowing rate in half over the last several years. In part, that's because we've done a better job. And by the way, just to be clear, we're not the only state college that that's true about. That is true in many of our colleague institutions. What we've noticed is that all of us are doing a better job of educating students about the borrowing opportunities and the risks of borrowing. Not that borrowing on its own is a bad thing, but too much debt we know is a bad thing. So, your question is really, really important. I'm also going to pull up for you, once I have access to it, sort of where we are from a graduate perspective. And our students are graduating with a reasonable amount of debt in general. There always are going to be exceptions to that norm, but in general, students who leave us are leaving with a fairly reasonable balance. I'm going to struggle to get that, Bill. Let me grab it. I'll grab it for you on the next call.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious what the average student debt is on that.
Yep. Yeah, I can pull that. So I would say nationwide we know, and nationwide, right? The average student loan debt nationwide's about $36,000 for students who graduate with their bachelor's degree. So, because we're primarily an associate's degree place, it would be about half of that. But that's the average student debt overall for students graduating. And we're well below that figure. Other questions? What else can I answer for folk? Daisy, what question is burning in your heart? I know there is one. How can I help you be helpful for your students?
So I work at the Central Florida Foundation, and so we do more scholarships. And
Yeah.
I guess my question is always around, so our scholarships are for tuition only.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you, in the in-person meeting, talked kind of about that. And I guess my question has been since then, and I know there was someone in the group who was actually trying to get to like the best wording we should include in our award letters. And I believe it was that this scholarship may be used for the cost of attendance for educational purposes.
Yep.
So then it could be used for how it's needed for tuition, books, housing's not educational cost, and we don't do that. But our big thing is we don't want the student to get a reimbursement from it, but we can't really stop that from happening, is what I gather.
Right. So there are a couple of issues. So keep in mind that your question presumes, and there's no fault here. It is what it is, right? It presumes that every dollar that comes in can be attributed to a particular expense. And so one of the things that's important to understand for scholarship providers and for us is when we set up an account for a student, we set up an account that has all of their expenses. And when we put credits in, it's not so I guess the best way of thinking about it is this way. Think about your credit card or anyone's credit card, right? You buy things all month, and at the end of the month you have a bill, and that bill is, let's say $300. And let's say one of the charges was $50 for groceries. So let's say someone gives you $50 to pay for those groceries. Well, there's no way for you to pay the credit card company just for those groceries. You're going to pay $500 for the total bill. Right? I don't know if that helps or not in terms of picturing how this works, but from a college's perspective, it works very similarly. We have an account, and that account includes all of the charges that a student might have: tuition, if they put books on their account, fees, if they have a parking fine, if they do other kinds of things. And so, all the money funnels through that account, and I can't say easily, this particular money only goes to pay for this particular charge, because it's all blended. Now, that said, we can return the money to you and say, sorry, this student only has X amount of tuition, and your grant is greater than that. So I can say, I'm not going to take your $50. I'm going to take only $40, for example. But one of the challenges, what happens if there are multiple people trying to pay that same tuition? And there may be other funds that are more general. So it is a little complicated. The other thing I would just put out there, obviously, is this question, which is what happens, and when are scholarships taxable? So remember that scholarships, and we don't often think about this, but scholarships for students could be taxable if they're paying for things beyond tuition, fees, room and board, those sorts of things. So, yeah, tuition, fees, and books, not room and board.
Room and board is taxable.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's important to understand as well for students, especially.
So how about like for Bright Futures or Florida Prepaid?
So those are both
now,
good questions.
Bright Futures, you can get 100% paid now.
Right. So the important thing to know about Bright Futures, and Florida OSFA is actually a great website. It's the floridastudentaid.org page.
Okay.
If you haven't seen this before, I usually find it by searching for Florida OSFA, but the direct link is floridastudentfinancialaid.org. Under their state grants information, they actually have a Bright Futures manual. So this is the Bright Futures Student Handbook. And what you'll see in the Bright Futures Student Handbook, if you read it through, and we could look for it now, but in the interest of time I won't, is that there's nothing that says that the scholarship is actually payable to tuition. It's based on the tuition amount, but it's not restricted to only paying tuition. So this is a common misunderstanding from students as well. They presume that because the amount of the award is based on tuition, that it can only pay tuition. That's not true. In fact, the scholarship can pay whatever it pays. It can pay tuition, it can pay room and board, it can pay miscellaneous expenses, it can be refunded. So there's no particular restriction that says it has to pay only for tuition. It's based on tuition, but there's nothing that says it has to pay solely for tuition.
So essentially, if a student has Bright Futures that pays 100%, and there's a scholarship for tuition,
Yep.
that scholarship can go towards tuition, and then this can pay for everything else.
Correct.
And then they can get the refund from this.
Correct.
Now, how about Florida prepaid?
Same with Florida prepaid. So Florida prepaid, that's exactly right.
So Daniel, how does Florida prepaid interact with any Pell Grants that are awarded?
So same way, because Pell Grant is also just a general fund that does not specifically pay for any particular type of funding. So Florida prepaid, from a financial aid perspective, Florida prepaid is treated as an asset of the parent. So it's actually ignored from the point of view of financial aid. It's not counted as part of that cost of attendance minus EFC equals need component here, right? There's no Florida prepaid part. Florida prepaid is part of this expected family contribution. It's not considered part of the need. The reason being that it's considered an asset of the owner. So it's not a part of, here, I'll show you again. Let me do a little web search and we'll find it.
So if you have a student that has both Pell and prepaid, you're going to use Pell first and then prepaid?
Well, prepaid doesn't even have to go into the formula.
Oh, okay.
So because where it's calculated is it's calculated as part of the family contribution. It's not actually part of the need formula. So for example here, hold on. Let's see if I can pull this up and this explains it. Right, so I mean, I'm trying to find a good reference for it to show you, but actually let's do it this way. So one of the financial aid images that I often use is I use the image of a barrel. So I'm just going to open up that PowerPoint quickly and show you the barrel, because I think that's a good analogy to sort of think about this in terms of the way that we're addressing it. So give me 1 second, let me open up the PowerPoint presentation, I'll show you the barrel. So I'm almost there. Okay. Here we go. So for example, right, here is the financial aid barrel. So let's say we have a student who has a $15,000 cost of attendance, right? And in this scenario, there's a $5,000 parent contribution or family contribution. Their need is $10,000, right? So as you put together, you'll notice, let's say this family had a Florida prepaid. It's not anywhere in this. Why is it not? Because it doesn't have to be counted as part of their need. It's part of that $5,000 family contribution. If the parent had it and reported it as an asset, it's part of the parent contribution from assets, but it doesn't actually go into this barrel because it's considered money the parents are using, just like they might be using a piece of their home equity, or they might be using a savings account they have. It's not a financial aid award from the point of view of the financial aid system. Does that help a little bit, or does that cause more?
It does, yeah. No, appreciate it.
Yeah. So Daisy, going back to your question around, the scholarship question, I mean, the issue to understand again is the The risk is if you say yours is tuition only and someone else says theirs is tuition only, ultimately they're going to butt heads. I can't pay tuition from multiple sources. The good news is none of the programs we've named so far, Bright Futures, the Florida Prepaid, Pell, have any restriction on tuition only. The one that does is VA benefits. So if a student is a VA student, VA will only pay for tuition that is not paid by another source that is specifically restricted to tuition. So if you're saying your grant is tuition only, then basically that student is not getting benefit from your grant because I have to reduce their VA benefit as a result. Yep. Back off of mute.
It's so interesting because there's just a lot of misinformation and understanding out there.
Absolutely, which is, again, one of the reasons that I started the blog, because I really wanted to help students understand and parents understand how the process works. And I agree there is a ton of misinformation. So I would strongly suggest that people submit questions here, and hopefully over time this will build to an information source that people can make reference to. So Bill, I'm happy to keep on going. It's about 2:30. Do you want to draw this to a close? What would be the
Yeah, I think I wanted to make sure that all the questions that we had here were answered. Sure, it sounds like they are. And Daniel, appreciate your time. And for those listening to this recording, Daniel is always very willing to answer questions. His email is up there on the recording. Feel free to reach out to him, and he'll share his wisdom unreservedly. He will not share any of those $1 million bills, unfortunately, but he will share his wisdom.
I can share the penny, but that's not a problem. So Daisy, yes, please do be in touch if you have more questions.
For questions and also for CFCAM.
Absolutely.
We have you on our list as a potential spotlight for one of our meetings, so we'll see how that works out.
Always happy to help. Always happy to help.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
Very informative. Thank you, Daniel.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And remember, I think we have a couple more scheduled of these. I think one of the ones we're going to talk about is how best to work with the financial aid office and the financial aid officer. But we're also going to spend some time talking about that independent override. When a student doesn't meet the federal qualifications, how do we determine when to override and make them independent? So that should be of interest as well.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
all. And I think we can stop the recording.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care, y'all.